On the morning of June 1st, 1921, a black lawyer named Buck Colbert Franklin stands outside his office building in Tulsa, Oklahoma, looking up at the sky with growing horror. He can see planes circling overhead. They grow in number, humming, darting and dipping low. He hears something that sounds like hail falling on the roof of his office building. Down East Archer, he watches the old Midway Hotel catch fire, burning from its top. Then another building begins to burn from its top, and another, and another. Buck Franklin realizes he's watching something that shouldn't be possible in America. Private planes are dropping incendiary devices on an American city, but they're not bombing all of Tulsa. They're only targeting one specific neighborhood, the wealthiest black neighborhood in America, his neighborhood. Within the next 24 hours, Buck Franklin's law office will be destroyed. So will approximately 1,200 other black-owned homes and businesses, and between 100 and 300 black Americans will be murdered in what remains one of the worst incidents of racial violence in United States history. This is the story of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and how one of the most prosperous black communities in America was destroyed in a single day. To understand what happened in Tulsa, you first need to understand what the Greenwood District was before it was destroyed. It's 1921 and Tulsa is an oil boom town. Money is flowing through the city, and while most of that money stays in white hands, black entrepreneurs in Tulsa have built something remarkable in a 35-block area north of the railroad tracks. It's called the Greenwood District, but most people know it by another name, Black Wall Street. And it actually lives up to that name. Walking down Greenwood Avenue in 1921, you'd see black-owned luxury hotels, restaurants, grocery stores, movie theaters, a hospital, a library, multiple newspapers, and even a bus system. There are black doctors, black lawyers, black architects. There are millionaires living in this neighborhood. The Stratford Hotel is a 54-room luxury building that rivals any white hotel in the city. The Dreamland Theatre, owned by John and Lula Williams, shows the latest films. On any given night, you might hear jazz music pouring out of nightclubs, smell food from multiple restaurants, see well-dressed families walking to church or to the theatre. This isn't supposed to exist, not in 1921 America, not in a country where Jim Crow laws strictly separate black and white citizens, not in a place where black people are supposed to be poor, uneducated, subservient, but Greenwood exists anyway, and it exists because of one simple economic principle. When your money can't leave the community, it circulates within it. Black dollars in Greenwood change hands multiple times before leaving the neighborhood. A dollar might pay for groceries at a black-owned store, then pay the salary of a black employee, then pay rent to a black landlord, then pay for services from a black doctor. That same dollar creates wealth 5 or 6 times over. The white citizens of Tulsa watch this prosperity with growing resentment. They call it Little Africa as an insult, but the residents wear the name with pride. Some white Tulsans are simply jealous. Others see Greenwood's success as a direct challenge to white supremacy. If black people can build this much wealth, this much success, what does that say about all the reasons white society has given for keeping them down? By May of 1921, the tension in Tulsa is thick enough to cut with a knife. White Tulsans have been talking more and more about putting black people back in their place. The Ku Klux Klan is growing in power throughout Oklahoma. There have been lynchings in nearby towns, including Roy Belton, who was taken from the courthouse by a white mob and hanged, with local law enforcement expressing gratitude to the lynch mob afterward. Everyone can feel that something is about to break. They just don't know what the spark will be. On May 30th, 1921, a 19-year-old black shoe shiner named Dick Rowland enters the Drexel building in downtown Tulsa. He's heading to the top floor to use the only bathroom in downtown Tulsa that black people are allowed to use. To get there, he has to take the elevator. The elevator operator is a 17-year-old white woman named Sarah Page. What happens next is that Rowland trips entering the elevator. The elevator doesn't stop level with the floor, and trying to save himself from falling, he grabs Sarah Page's arm to steady himself. Startled, Page screams. Dick Rowland panics and runs from the building. A clerk hears the scream, sees a black man running, and calls the police. The police investigate and don't seem particularly worried that a crime has been committed. They wait until the next day to arrest Rowland, but by then, the story has already been twisted beyond recognition. On May 31st, the Tulsa Tribune, an afternoon newspaper, publishes a front-page story with the headline, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator," claiming Rowland had been charged with attempting to assault Sarah Page. The article is inflammatory and contains false details. Some survivors report seeing a second article that was even worse, directly calling for Rowland to be lynched, though that editorial has been torn out of every surviving copy of that day's paper. Dick Rowland is being held in the county jail on the top floor of the courthouse. Sheriff Willard McCullough knows exactly what's coming. He's seen lynch mobs before. Just the previous summer, a white mob took Roy Belton from this very courthouse and hanged him, and Sheriff McCullough is right to be worried. By early evening on May 31st, a white mob of approximately 2,000 people has gathered outside the courthouse. They're armed, they're angry, and they're demanding that the sheriff hand over Dick Rowland so they can lynch him. Sheriff McCullough refuses. He disables the elevator and positions his deputies on the stairs with orders to shoot anyone who tries to come up. Meanwhile, in Greenwood, the black community is hearing about what's happening. They know the story of Dick Rowland's crime is false. He tripped in an elevator. They also know that if the mob gets their hands on him, he'll be dead within the hour. They still remember Roy Belton burning at the end of a rope. They're not going to let that happen again. Around 9 p.m., a group of approximately 75 black men, many of them World War I veterans, arm themselves and drive to the courthouse. They offer to help the sheriff protect his prisoner. Sheriff McCullough tells them he has the situation under control and asks them to leave. After some discussion, they agree and start heading back to their cars. But as they're leaving, a white man confronts one of the black veterans and demands he hand over his gun. In the struggle, the gun goes off, and just like that, everything explodes. The single gunshot is all it takes. Suddenly, white men in the mob are pulling out their own weapons and firing into the group of black men. The black men return fire. In the initial exchange, 10 white men and 2 black men are killed. The black veterans fight their way back toward Greenwood, but something terrible is happening behind them. The white mob isn't satisfied with having driven them off. They're not going home. Instead, the mob is growing. Within an hour, it swells to more than 10,000 white Tulsans, and they're not staying at the courthouse. They're marching north toward Greenwood. By midnight, the invasion has begun. Thousands of white rioters, many of them deputized by city officials and given weapons from police and National Guard armories, begin pouring into the Greenwood District. They're going door to door, dragging black families into the streets. Some families are marched to internment centers at gunpoint. Others are simply shot on sight. Dr. A.C. Jackson, one of the most respected surgeons in the region, walks out of his home with his hands up in surrender. He's shot dead on his front lawn. His crime being successful while black firefighters arrive to fight the fires that are starting to break out, but white rioters turn them away at gunpoint. Let it burn, they say. White Tulsans are throwing torches and Molotov cocktails through windows. Others are looting black-owned businesses before setting them on fire. The black residents of Greenwood fight back as best they can. World War I veterans set up defensive positions and return fire. Some people escape through alleyways and into the countryside beyond the city. Families run through the smoke and flames trying to reach safety. But they're outnumbered at least 100 to 1, and the attackers have the backing of local law enforcement. And then the planes arrive. On the morning of June 1st, Buck Colby Franklin looks up and sees planes dropping what appear to be turpentine bombs onto the roofs of homes and businesses. Other eyewitnesses report seeing the same thing. The exact role of the planes remains debated by historians. Some believe they were used primarily for reconnaissance and to intimidate, while survivors consistently report seeing incendiary devices being dropped. What's certain is that the planes were there, circling over Greenwood as the neighborhood burned. By dawn on June 1st, Greenwood is in flames. The entire district is burning. The smoke can be seen for miles. John and Lula Williams, the owners of the Dreamland Theatre, watch their business burn. The Williams family escapes with their lives, but everything they've built is destroyed. By the time the Oklahoma National Guard arrives and martial law is declared on the afternoon of June 1st, it's already over. Black Wall Street has been reduced to ashes. The official death toll will later be listed as 36, but that number is a lie. Mass graves will be discovered decades later. Most historians now estimate between 100 and 300 Black Tulsans were killed. The exact number will never be known. When the smoke clears, more than 1,200 Black-owned homes and businesses have been destroyed. That's 35 blocks completely leveled. 10,000 Black Tulsans are homeless. Many spend the winter living in tents. And here's the really twisted part. Not a single white person is ever convicted for any crime related to the massacre. But dozens of Black Tulsans are arrested and charged with inciting a riot. Dick Rowland is eventually released. Sarah Page declines to press charges, and the case is dismissed in September 1921. Most historians believe nothing actually happened in that elevator beyond an accidental stumble. Insurance companies refuse to pay out on the destroyed properties, citing riot clauses in their policies. When Black residents try to rebuild, the city passes new building codes and fire ordinances specifically designed to make rebuilding too expensive. Some white Tulsans propose turning the Greenwood District into an industrial area or railroad depot. The message is clear: we don't want you to rebuild, we don't want you to come back. But here's something amazing: they do come back. Buck Colbert Franklin sets up his law practice in a Red Cross tent in the middle of the still smoldering ruins. He fights all the way to the Oklahoma Supreme Court to defeat laws that would have prevented residents from rebuilding. Against all odds, the residents of Greenwood begin reconstructing their neighborhood. By 1925, much of Greenwood has been rebuilt, though it will never quite recapture its pre-massacre glory. The neighborhood survives for decades more, though it's dealt another blow in the 1960s, when urban renewal projects demolish much of what remains. But even worse than the physical destruction is the silence that follows. For decades, the Tulsa Race Massacre is essentially erased from history. It's not taught in Oklahoma schools. It doesn't appear in most history books. Survivors are told not to talk about it. People growing up in Tulsa would overhear whispered conversations about the riot that adults would stop when children entered the room. The city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma seem determined to pretend it never happened. It's not until the 1990s that serious historical investigation begins. In 2001, a commission recommends reparations for survivors. The manuscript that Buck Colbert Franklin wrote about his experiences wasn't discovered until 2015, hidden in a storage area for decades. As of 2021, the centennial of the massacre, only a handful of survivors were still alive, still fighting for justice, still fighting for recognition. So why am I telling you this story? Why does it matter what happened in Tulsa over 100 years ago? Because the Tulsa Race Massacre isn't just a story about the past. It's a story about how wealth builds and how it's stolen. It's about how trauma echoes through generations. It's about how easy it is for society to erase its own crimes when those crimes are committed against people it doesn't value. Think about what was lost that day. Not just the buildings, not just the money, though that was substantial. Current estimates put the financial losses at $27 million in 1921 dollars. That's more than $400 million today. But it's not just about the money. It's about the businesses that would have been passed down to children and grandchildren, the generational wealth that would have accumulated, the doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs who might have emerged from a thriving Black Wall Street, the example it could have set for Black communities across America. All of that was stolen in less than 24 hours. And it was stolen not by some distant enemy, not by a foreign invader, but by fellow Americans, by neighbors, by people who couldn't stand to see Black people succeeding. The Tulsa Race Massacre also shows us something important about how history is remembered. For 70 years, this wasn't called a massacre. It was called a riot, as if both sides were equally responsible, as if the Black residents of Greenwood did something to deserve having their neighborhood bombed and burned. Even the language we use to describe historical events can be a weapon. Today, there's a movement to acknowledge what happened in Tulsa and to provide some measure of justice to the survivors and their descendants. Excavations have been conducted to search for mass graves. In 2021, the centennial of the massacre, President Biden became the first sitting president to visit Tulsa and formally acknowledge what happened there. But for the survivors, now gone or over 100 years old, this recognition came almost too late. They spent their entire lives watching the world pretend their trauma never happened. Buck Colbert Franklin's manuscript, the one where he described watching planes circle overhead and drop burning objects on his neighborhood, sat hidden and forgotten for nearly a century before it was discovered. His son John Hope Franklin became one of America's most distinguished historians, and even he didn't know his father had written such a detailed account. How many other stories are still hidden? How many other witnesses took their testimonies to the grave because no one would listen? What happened in Tulsa isn't ancient history. It's a crime within living memory. And it's a crime that America is only just beginning to acknowledge. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.